UN Global Compact, it's a worldwide grouping. Perhaps let's start at what you're trying to do as the UN Global Compact, and then we'll bring it back to South Africa.
Thank you. So at the Global Compact, and specifically at the Global Compact Network South Africa, our mandate really is to bring business together with government and other stakeholders to try and find solutions to issues that challenge our governance, like corruption, to find solutions to facilitating human rights and other rights like labor rights and environmental rights. And so anti-corruption is really one of the big issues that we look at in South Africa.
All right, so companies join the UN Global Compact movement,
yes,
and then sort of, I suppose, pledge to behave responsibly in all of those areas. So the revelations that have come through this week at the State Capture Inquiry must be quite alarming for you and worrying. And I wonder if you could give us a global perspective and then domestically. Is it as bad in other countries as we're seeing here?
Look, I think corruption is global. I'm quite shocked, even though I work in the sector and we work on anti-corruption. The nature of it, the sort of deliberate attempt to weaken the state. I think this is another level of it, so it's shocking for us even working in the sector. Globally, we've seen big cases as well, and that's why through the Global Compact, we say that let us strengthen governance, let the private sector take leadership, together with government, to try and strengthen anti-corruption, to try and strengthen our governance systems. So it's really, really, I think, unforgivable that these are business people doing the exact opposite of what we are advocating globally.
So what have you been able to do in South Africa?
So because corruption is transactional, because in South Africa we've determined years back that one of our greatest risk areas is in procurement, and specifically public procurement, because government really is the single, I think, largest procurer in South Africa. And so there's huge interest. It's almost inevitable that people who are corrupt would target public procurement. And so what we have asked business, and what we continue to ask business and to ask government and as well as civil society organizations, is like one individual entity is not going to fight it alone. Let's come together and advance what we call anti-corruption collective action. And there are individual things that a business can do. A business can put measures to ensure that employees and the business is done, following good values and good principles. Government can do the same on its own. But we are aware that people still find gaps. Corruption happens when there is an opportunity. And that's why we call for the different sectors to come together and fight it together. If government and private sector and civil society organizations don't come together to fight corruption, it's going to be very challenging for us as a country.
We hear of cartels, fixing prices and so on and so forth. And I just wonder, should companies be reporting each other, whistleblowing on each other? What sort of interventions, tangible ones, can be put into play?
So that's a very good point you're raising. I think it's important, especially the role of industry associations, for instance. Those clubs that certain sectors are ascribed to, they sit in a very powerful space to try and inculcate good standards within those sectors. And those sectors, several of them collectively doing similar things and saying, if, for instance, you belong to, let's say, agriculture or infrastructure sector, and you're a company that wants to do business here, these are the standards that we are going to subscribe to. These are the principles that is going to govern members of this particular sector. That will roll over to the whole industry as a whole. And so it's quite important for industry associations, industry collective platforms to begin to implore on their members and find monitoring mechanisms to ensure that companies that belong to those associations adhere to a certain set of principles, a certain set of standards. On the government sector, and we've said this before, from the public sector side, I think it's going to be important for government to say that these are the pre-requirements we are going to be needing for you as a company to be able to do business with us. I think government still sits in a very influential position to enforce certain pre-requirements. And if a company does not meet those requirements, then government should be able to say that we won't do business with you.
Do you think there should be, much like fair trade stamps on products, that a company gets a ethical behavior stamp, maybe that I belong to the UN Global Compact, and that association and affiliation gives assurance to procurers that this company isn't a corrupt one, but that the moment that they fall out, that certification gets taken away?
Absolutely. That will be part of a bigger due diligence system. There must be due diligence within individual companies, within sectors. And for one to do business with another, there should be something indicating that this is our history, this is how we do business, and we subscribe to certain ethical standards, and this is how we are going to enforce the principles that we require of you.
How long will it take, do you think, to turn this tide around? It is a continent-wide problem, and I suspect it's going to need a continent-wide effort. Can we win?
We can win. It starts at the leadership level. What has been quite a thing shocking is when it is perpetrated by a business leader, then it becomes a bit more difficult, because leadership is really what would drive. Companies are things that have a good record. I've had very strong leaders with very strong values. And so it's going to start at a leadership level. It then has to escalate to a more collective, positive leadership, and we're going to have to influence each other. That's the only way we'll even begin to talk about the rest of the continent. Right. So it has to be a multiplier effect.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I think it's a conversation we probably need to keep on having. But thanks so much indeed for joining us today, Dr. Ojwang. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's focus on other issues now.